Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here. Just doing a quick little addendum to this video. I actually recorded it about a week ago, and since then there's been a little bit of news regarding DLC for Final Fantasy 16. No specifics, nothing spoilery in case you're worried about that, but I figured I'd cover that here at the start of the video, and then you can watch the original video in its entirety, kind of with the context that we just didn't have this more recent news. So this morning I woke up with a Twitter tag for an interview that was done by the YouTube channel Gamer Braves. I'm going to include a link in the description to their channel and to the video in question, which just has them sitting down with Yoshi-P and Koji Fox and talking for about, it says 13 minutes and 14 seconds here for the video itself. Now, they go through a handful of questions about the expectations of the game, some specifics that are spoilery, so if you do watch that video, I would be a little bit careful in case you haven't actually finished the game yet, and there's things that you might catch from that. But there is one final bit, 10 minutes and 50 seconds into the video. Are there any plans for DLC? Now, we kind of got the same answer that we usually get from Yoshi-P, and that's that, you know, it's based on feedback that people get from the game. They didn't plan any DLC from before the game came out. However, more specifically, Yoshi-P says now they've looked at the feedback and that there is a high demand to spend more time in Valisthea in Final Fantasy 16. So they're looking into options. It sounds very likely that we will get DLC for Final Fantasy 16 strictly on player demand and not on like planned, hey, we cut this so that we could do it later kind of deal. Now, the video that I made talks a little bit about whether or not I expect DLC and the kinds of DLC that I would expect kind of at the top of my list. I think a lot of people have a similar list, especially if you have played the game all the way through. So again, I would be careful with the comment section of this video. I would be careful about the rest of my video after this point, but I just wanted to point out that Yoshi-P has more definitively said they are looking into options for additional content for Final Fantasy 16 now that the player feedback and demand has proven to be quite fervent or fervorous. I don't know. People want it. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, with that, go listen to 1 week ago me be dumb about it and enjoy the video. Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I want to talk about yet another major topic with Final Fantasy 16, DLC. Yep, this is a term that can be as exciting to hear as it can be excruciating to hear. It is both used to give us more of what we love and more of what we should have had in the first place. And with Final Fantasy 16 now out and complete and people talking about it, the question of DLC is hot on the tongues of those of us who have beaten it. So today, I want to give my take on this. Spoiler warning, I will be discussing major story beats here. So a quick spoiler-free TLDR, I expect at minimum one important major content update, the collaboration between Final Fantasy 14 and 16, which we know will inevitably happen. However, there is evidence and speculation enough to warrant more than that and to maybe expect more than that. So with that, click away now if you want to avoid spoilers. So to start this discussion, I think it's important to note that Final Fantasy 16, as we have received it, is a full game. I personally felt completely sated and satisfied with the overall game, even if I levied some criticisms against specific elements that could have been done better. That being said, my playthrough wasn't completely void of experiences that made me go, huh, wonder why that wasn't there. Maybe DLC? It's definitely a conflicting feeling because we know Yoshida's main goal with 16 was to deliver a full and complete game and leave any DLC plans for after the game's initial sales and feedback. Below is a quote from an exclusive Yoshida did with Game Informer discussing just that. It's a one-off game, Yoshida told Game Informer. We're asking players to pay the full price for this experience, and so we want an experience that's going to equal the amount of money that players are going to be paying, and we want them to have satisfaction equal to what they paid or even more than that. We have no idea if people are going to fall in love with Valisthea and fall in love with Clive's story and want to see more of the world and more of its characters. So while we always want to consider DLC or spin-offs for these types of things where you can learn more about the game, first we want to see if Valisthea and Clive are really things players around the world want to see more of and make that decision. Now, of course, you can't always take statements like that at face value. Even the author of the article, linked below for reference, states how common it is amongst the last several entries in the Final Fantasy franchise. Heck, even in that statement, while he wants to deliver a full game experience and then maybe expand it with DLC later, as opposed to holding things back for DLC, still expresses interest in doing DLC and spin-offs. Heck, there's another interview, I don't have it handy because I'm just remembering it off the top of my head, where he straight up says they have enough lore to do an entire second game if they really wanted to. And knowing how this game ends, that says a lot. So I'm really curious to see what they've got in the tank for that. But the big thing here is talking about whether or not anything was deliberately withheld, and I really don't think it was. Yoshida himself discussed Final Fantasy XV's DLC approach as not delivering a full game. It would be pretty backwards to say that while having a pre-planned DLC. So here's the quote that I'm referring to. While we're moving to action and we put a lot of effort into creating action, it's got to be about the story. Final Fantasy is about the story. We put our main focus, even more than action, on that story. And you look back at the previous games at Final Fantasy XV. They had their story, but it wasn't complete. And then they try to make it complete, and then they promise some more story, but then they don't give us the story. And so you had a lot of people that went into the series wanting us to give them a great story, and they didn't get that. And a lot of people were disappointed in that. Like, even if they liked the game, they're left wanting because one of those main pillars of the Final Fantasy series, stories, was not given to them. And so we wanted to make sure that we had our first and foremost focus on the story, and we think that is going to set us apart from all those other games out there. So yeah, I'm willing to bet what we were delivered was mostly the intended story content for Final Fantasy XVI. However, almost anyone who has played the game has noticed one major flaw in the game's overall story, something that outright shakes the foundation of the plot and causes one's head to turn and question and ask that, was it cut for DLC moment? That major flaw is none other than Leviathan. Early on in the game's marketing, as early as the Ambition trailer, if memory serves, we were given an image of a mural that depicted the icons, alongside an angelic figure at its peak, which we now know the identity of. You can spot the icons we know are in the game: Garuda, Titan, Bahamut, Odin, Ifrit, Shiva, and Ramu. Now, Phoenix is missing, but that's explained in the game's story, but the really interesting thing is the inclusion of Leviathan. It is never mentioned in any pre-release material, it's never acknowledged by the development team, and more importantly, even the game itself tries to mention Leviathan as little as possible. Now, in the back half of the game's story, we do get our singular tease on this. As Joshua looks up at said mural, he rattles off the icons' names. At this moment, he finally acknowledges Leviathan, but calls that icon something more specific: Leviathan the Lost. It's implied through this name alone that Leviathan just hasn't chosen a dominant in a very long time, or hasn't been able to choose a dominant for other reasons. Whether this is because it simply didn't find anyone worthy, or because of the lost mother crystal of Drake's Eye in the Northwest, the same mother crystal from Jill's homeland, that's all speculation. Heck, there could even be a mother crystal in the ocean that we didn't know about, but that would be even weirder given Ultima. I mean, Ultima is really the crux in all this, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Leviathan not showing up in the game, of course, brings into question whether or not it was planned DLC. I actually think two things happened with this. One, I do think Leviathan was simply cut from the final product. Whether that's because it didn't fit the narrative or couldn't be finished for whatever other reason, that's all speculation. We know for a fact they were originally going to use Alexander and had to cut them, and that Diablos was originally going to be sort of like an evolved form of Ifrit, which we got something completely different for that, but there was going to be something more Diablos-esque for Ifrit. We know those two were cut, so it's entirely possible that Leviathan, while not cut from the story, or while not cut from the game entirely, was cut in terms of like its involvement with everything. And again, we just don't know the exact reason why. However, I do think something else actually happened, though. And it's just another possibility, a little bit of a tinfoil hat theory, but I think they might have deliberately left Leviathan out to create a flaw in the game's plot. Because if it wasn't deliberate, it sure works out well. Literally about to spoil the end of the game here, by the way, so I mean it with the spoiler warnings. You have been warned. At the end of Clive's journey, he has absorbed all the icons, he goes to fight Ultima, he fully realizes himself and saves the world and his people. He absorbs Ultima's power as he did all of the icons prior, but at the end of it, before striking the final blow to the remaining crystal to destroy all the remaining magic in the world and set them free from the path they were on, he notes that his body could not actually handle Ultima's power. He wasn't the perfect vessel. Incomplete, whatever. This actually makes perfect sense. If the mother crystals and the icons and the dominance and basically everything in the game was manifested by Ultima as a long-term means of enacting his plan to rebirth this race, then Leviathan being missing would ensure this plan's failure. If Clive doesn't have every icon, can he be the perfect vessel? Was Ultima just planning to go on a side adventure to grab Leviathan after the fact? What was the real plan here? It means that Clive not being the perfect vessel makes sense, but it also means Ultima's plan was seemingly doomed to fail anyway, unless he was planning on going and getting it later. Is this perhaps like the 13th in Final Fantasy XIV? There's always going to be that missing piece that can never be rejoined. Is that what Leviathan is in this story? At this point, believe whatever you want, but the fact of the matter is that Leviathan is at the top of everyone's DLC wishes or expectations. I'm not so sure. I think we'll sooner learn more about this particular element in interviews and follow-up stuff with the dev team. I'm not convinced they're going to do anything with Leviathan to explain it in the future, unless they really deem the feedback is saying that they have to make a Leviathan DLC. Maybe they'd even put some more lore into the game retroactively. That's possible too. Now, that's not the only DLC that people kind of have ambitions for or hopes for. Most people honestly don't have anything nearly as ambitious on their wish list. Many simply want more hunts, a boss arena, maybe a higher difficulty setting. Don't know anyone who wants that. Can't think of anyone in particular. And more iconic enemies to the franchise. Tonberries, Cactars, icon battles with Shiva and Ramuh, a semi-primed Dion, Omega, Gilgamesh, you name it. Final Fantasy fans want it. And that kind of defines Final Fantasy for me. That's a whole separate video. That's been another big topic we got to touch upon. But those elements and wanting them to return, those easy to appeal to moments, those kind of do lightly define the Final Fantasy franchise. So wanting those things is completely logical. I, however, don't think we're going to get any of that, crazy enough as it is. Now, I think it's silly of me to say it's unlikely to happen. I just don't think we will get it. And it's hard to really predict that when, according to them, they don't have anything planned until post-release, so they would be the ones starting to plan this now, if anything at all. Even with Yoshida explaining that he built a kind of sales plan or sales expectation of around 18 months, there's a source for that in the description, that's more due to like PS5's availability and the total consoles owned, and not really like a content roadmap. Maybe the PC release is factored into that 18 months in some way, we just have no idea. I think that if any of that stuff is going to happen, it's going to happen because the devs want to do it and deliver it. We know that a lot of people who worked on Final Fantasy XIV were moved over to 16 over the years as they hired more people for Final Fantasy XIV, and Creative Business Unit 3 continued to grow, and all those, etc., etc. And we've seen what Yoshi-P's team under him has done in their own time before. They've created entire game modes and added flying to an entire expansion, an entire subculture of Final Fantasy XIV, just because they wanted to do it. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen with 16 as well, and for them to see, oh, people are missing these elements, let's go do that. But again, I refuse to expect something like that. It'd just be a nice surprise. So I guess it sounds like I don't expect any DLC. I expect quality of life updates. We already know some are on the way, like the motion blur toggle and some performance updates for certain parts. But there is one bit of DLC I fully expect, and that is the inevitable Final Fantasy XIV and 16 collaboration. Yoshida has been joking around about talking with the producer of Final Fantasy XIV for a collab for like over a year now. And even the social team on Final Fantasy XIV has tweeted such statements and assurances that they'll get together for a talk. It's a foregone conclusion that only leaves questions of when and what it will involve. Either way, I don't expect that till 2024. It could be as late as the PC release, but I think that maybe they'll use it as something to do between the final patch of Endwalker and waiting for 7.0. I think that's the most likely timing for it. I also wouldn't be surprised to see a free update with some additional hunts and bosses added alongside the PC version later down the line, which of course is still a huge unknown. I mean, exclusivity ends at the end of 2023, but I don't think we're going to see the PC release for minimum a year, probably longer, but again, speculation, conjecture, whatever you want to call it. And of course, at the end of it all comes the question, is DLC even a good idea for Final Fantasy 16? I kind of want no DLC in some capacity. Like, yeah, I do have the expectations for the collaboration. One of the most exhausting things about Final Fantasy 15 and making content for Final Fantasy 15, and something that's just kind of exhausting about creating content, I guess, in the current landscape of gaming, is that needing to add the little asterisk of after the DLC or including DLC or this is also including free updates. There's always like some sort of subcontext whenever it comes to discussing any game, it feels like nowadays. And Final Fantasy 15 specifically was, yeah, a great content roadmap for me. Sure, I got to make a billion YouTube videos because they kept updating it. But like as a game, it would have been nice to just settle down, talk about the things that happen at launch, maybe a few things that happen after, and be done with it. And I kind of want that with 16. I don't want 2 years from now to have to turn to somebody and be like, yeah, did you play it before the DLC or after the DLC? Yeah, I want to be able to just say, this was 16, these are the things I liked, these are the things I didn't like, and just be able to have a nice discussion about that. I have that with a lot of games that I've played throughout my life, and it's becoming less and less common. So while, yes, I do think that quality of life stuff like they're adding is absolutely essential to the long-term health and recommendations of the game, and just something that we have the technology to fix nowadays, and there's really no excuse not to. At the same time, I just don't want it to go any further than that. Expect a few things here or there. Be ready in case there are a few things here or there. And of course, if anything happens, I'll report on it. I'll make content on it. But I would just like one game that just is what it is, flaws and all, and it's done. Except for the few that, like I said, they can go out of their way to fix. So that's just where I'm at with that personally. But you can feel free to want it, discuss it, speculate on it as much as you want. I'll respect that just as much. But that's where I'm at personally. Anyway, that's going to be a wrap from my thoughts on DLC for Final Fantasy 16. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments section of the video below. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned. I've got a bunch of topics still to talk about with 16. And of course, like I said, whenever those free updates come for the motion blur and whatnot, I'll be sure to let everyone know. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, take care.